West, and we're starting with the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals have $65.9 million in effective cap space to spend. That is fourth most in the NFL. You know, it's interesting looking at their upcoming free agents because they're about to have so much flexibility along the defensive line. And I think when you thought of the Arizona Cardinals and some draft needs for them, some team needs, I think edge rusher and interior defensive line was already sort of top of mind, but LJ Collier, Roy Lopez, Baron Browning, Julian Okwara, Dennis Gardick, Jesse Luketa, Victor Dimukeje, like all of those dudes are pending free agents for them. And then you go to the offensive line as well, Evan Brown, Will Hernandez, Kelvin Beachum. Like, to me, it just feels as though it's going to be a heavy trench draft for the Arizona Cardinals. What do you think when it comes to their team needs?
No, I agree. I think free agency and in the draft, I think there's several guards. You mentioned both of their starting guards in Brown and Hernandez that could need to be replaced, right? Maybe they bring back an Evan Brown on a cheaper contract and he sticks around one more year because there's going to be some percentage of those guys in the trenches that get retained. I don't know if they want to go with a completely fresh start into a year where they probably feel like they could get in wild card contention with a good offseason at the very least, right? It is a tough division, but the Cardinals, didn't they start, what was it, 6-3 they started, or 6-4?
Shoot, I think it was better than that, wasn't it? Hold on.
It may have been, and then they had a losing streak where everything just kind of fell apart on them, a 4 or 5 game losing streak down the stretch. But, you know, I think you're right. Trenches are going to be a big focus. I think they're one of the teams with all the cap space that if they wanted to get in on a bigger name in free agency on the defensive line, a Josh Sweat or a Milton Williams especially, I think would fit perfectly in there. I mentioned those two guys as well because Jonathan Gannon's going to be at least somewhat familiar with them from his time in Philly, right? So you mentioned it. Offensive line, the guard spots I think are easier to fill in free agency than the tackle spots. I think when you get to the draft, then you start talking about, okay, more depth off of the edge, maybe a starting right tackle, maybe somebody like an Armand Membu or somebody else that'll flip over from left tackle to right tackle. I think you have a lot in the trenches that needs to be worked on. And then I think cornerback is another spot on the outside. Garrett Williams became one of the best players in the slot this season, but they need some help on the outside. I think another team that would fit with Jair Alexander really well, or maybe a Kendall Fuller who was just released from the Miami Dolphins. They got some key spots to fill, but this team I don't think is that far away from playoff contention. But you mentioned it, the trenches are going to be the main focus this offseason.
I would agree. I like the targets of Armand Membu, Derek Harmon. I think Kenneth Grant, you could throw him in there as well. I think he's a really good football player. I think when you talk about interior defensive linemen like a Derek Harmon or a Kenneth Grant, I think some Arizona Cardinals fans are more apathetic about that just because it's not a major difference maker. And unfortunately, I feel like they have a lot of holes along the defensive line. So when you look at that kind of addition, you go, okay, well, how much is this really moving the needle for us next year? I think you still need to try to make that addition if you think that's the best football player available there for you in the first round. This is a big year for Kyler Murray. I thought that this past year, Kyler was going to become the closest version to that MVP season that we have seen from him yet. He's dealt with some injury. Now he's fully healthy this past year. And it was a lot of inconsistencies from Kyler. And I'm not saying that you're about to move on from him. I still think he's a quarterback that you win with in this league. But if he puts up another season in 2025 that's just a lot of highs, a lot of lows, a lot of, you sort of live with the good, live with the bad, then I think you think about Kyler Murray differently. And I don't think that – I think that there then is too much evidence to the contrary of thinking that he will consistently be an MVP caliber quarterback for you. And you would have to think he's just going to be sort of a roller coaster ride of a player. So this year, for as much as, they got major defensive line needs, to me, they also need to have players in place to allow Kyler to play as well as he possibly can, because if you don't get the answer that you want from him, then all of a sudden you maybe start thinking about other options, or maybe you are less all in on this Kyler Murray era. I haven't even looked up his contract, so I don't know. Maybe they're not even close from, moving on from him or anything like that. But to me, I think it's a huge Kyler year. So I think with a lot of money to spend in free agency, as much as they need help on the defensive side of the football, I'm going after interior offensive line. I'm improving that offensive line as best I can. I'm maybe going after, upgrading some passing weapons or running back depth or whatever it is. I know McBride and having Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson, who I like, and James Conner is great, but you've got to make sure that there's no excuses there. Do you have Kyler Murray's contract up? Did you look at it? What's he at right now?
Yeah, essentially, where the way it's structured is this is the make or break year. Like you mentioned, they can pretty easily get out of it next offseason. Even a post June 1 cut saves them $42 million next offseason and creates about $11 million in dead money. But it would save them a ton of money this offseason. You couldn't do anything about it, and you probably wouldn't anyway, like you mentioned. But the way this is structured, this is really the make or break year, because the 2026 offseason, they could really get out of it pretty easily and start setting themselves up maybe in next year's draft.
Los Angeles Rams, speaking of quarterbacks that might be on the move, there's rumors out there that Matthew Stafford could potentially be out with the Los Angeles Rams. I kind of think that would be crazy, but right now they're scheduled to have $34.7 million in effective cap space available. That is 14th most in the NFL. Outside of Matthew Stafford, some guys that are some potential, some upcoming free agents for them: Valeric Jackson, Demarcus Robinson, Christian Roseboom, Joe Noteboom, Akilah Weatherspoon, Bobby Brown the third. He was a great run stuffer for them. Neville Gallimore as well. Jimmy Garoppolo happens to be an unrestricted free agent. Not that I think that that's going to be a major needle mover for them, but what do you think about the Los Angeles Rams? Obviously, they're looking to trade and move on from Cooper Kupp as well. We kind of heard that from them, and that was announced, a couple of weeks ago. So some potential team needs here for Los Angeles. What do we got?
So, the Stafford rumors throw a wrench in all of it, right? Because they already had needs at very important spots. You mentioned Alaric Jackson. They might have a hole at left tackle after Jackson just broke out with a big year in 2024, and now he's going to be in free agency and maybe one of the highest paid offensive linemen in free agency. You have a need at receiver if you're going to trade Cooper Kupp, because there's not a whole lot outside of Puka Nacua and maybe Demarcus Robinson. Then I think defensively, look, they rebuilt the defensive line last year, did an A-plus job with that, but they're a little thin at linebacker. Obviously, Omar Spates looks like a starter, after being an undrafted rookie this past season. And then on the outside at corner, look, I think at D-line and at safety, they really fixed this defense up this last offseason, I should say. But now linebacker and corner, they got to fill out those spots. And like I mentioned, left tackle and receiver, those are two pretty big spots on your offense. And now, if you have a situation with Matthew Stafford, your questions are, what are you getting back for him? And what in the world is your plan at quarterback? I think you have to start thinking about that. Do they turn around? Is it a veteran? Is it Sam Darnold? Is that where we're going with this? Because he ran a similar system in Minnesota. Is it, finding a way to get draft ammo and move up in the draft? Because I don't think, you mentioned the Giants earlier, they're not giving up the third overall pick for Matt Stafford. That's not happening. I don't know if a team, just with Stafford's age alone, I don't know if they would give up a first-round pick for him, right? So, and then there's a matter of what destinations make sense for Stafford. I think it's throwing a wrench in their whole offseason, because now you go, okay, if they don't have Stafford, if they're getting younger, are they really planning to – obviously you plan to win. Everybody plans to win, but do we really think this team can be in championship contention with a quarterback other than Matthew Stafford next year or even for the next 2 years, right? So I think there's a lot of fog surrounding the Rams offseason now with these Stafford rumors in there, but certainly left tackle, receiver, and corner especially would get a lot of attention for me.
Yeah, obviously the Stafford trade wouldn't throw a wrench in their plans. It throws a wrench in our projection plans for what the Rams are. But clearly, if they're moving on from him, they're moving on from him because they've thought about this. This isn't just a rash decision that you kind of make overnight, moving on from a guy that won you a Super Bowl a couple of years ago. So especially if he's not retiring, he's going to continue to play. We will see. I like a lot of the names that you brought to the table there for the Los Angeles Rams, but there's no doubt at all. Depends on what happens with Stafford. San Francisco 49ers. $38.6 million in effective cap space is 12th most in the NFL this offseason. Free agents. Devondre Campbell, who will not be playing for the San Francisco 49ers moving forward, so we know that he is not coming back. But, on top of that, Aaron Banks, starting guard for them. Talanoa Hufanga, who's been in and out of the lineup, but, man, when he's in the lineup, he is very valuable for them. Charvarius Ward, who's been a starting corner for them, but for personal reasons, it kind of seems like his time in San Francisco is done, and he's going to move on elsewhere. Rock Ya-Sin, Isaac Yiadom, those guys in the secondary. Dre Greenlaw, also an unrestricted free agent, which sucks because I thought he was a great linebacker, certainly before he tore his Achilles in the Super Bowl the year before, and really just did not get to play much this season, rehabbing from that injury. Elijah Mitchell, their backup running back is a free agent as well. What do you think about the 49ers and where they're at with their team needs?
Yeah, I think with all those guys and some of them very big names, I think they have to figure out which guys they want to keep first and foremost. Do we feel good enough about Dre Greenlaw's health to bring him back and stay next to Fred Warner? Do we feel good enough about Talanoa Hufanga to be the safety alongside Jair Brown and continuing to be that, right? He hasn't really been the same since tearing his ACL 2 seasons ago, right? So I think about who in that group are they going to be able to retain? And where's this, obviously, all the cap stuff goes into where's this Brock Purdy situation going and how much is he going to make over the next 4 or 5 years? And then beyond that, I think about the trenches, right? I think about their offensive line, something we've talked about for a long time. Aside from Trent Williams, who are the stars going to be on this offensive line? Now you've got your left guard, Aaron Banks, is a free agent. Is he another guy that's going to stay? They're another team I think about as a scheme fit. Maybe if you're going big at center, going and getting a guy like Drew Dahlman, who's a really good outside zone blocker. And then on the defensive line, stopping the run's been a problem, right? You have Nick Bosa. The base of your pass rush is going to be good. But I think about somebody like Poona Ford from the Chargers who could really help you on the inside. Even if they were to re-sign Javon Hargrave, that doesn't help the run defense at all. Hargrave's a great pass rusher, but he's not a very good run defender, hasn't been for years. So somebody like Poona Ford or Taylor Tart from the Chargers, we know it's a big-time run-defending defensive tackle class this year. I think they could get a lot of that, even 1 or 2 guys, multiple guys from this class. But I think about the trenches first and foremost when you talk about the overall improvement of the Niners. They need a better rest of the offensive line aside from Trent Williams. And even eventually, I think you saw Kelvin Banks there on the board for them. And I don't think there would be a more perfect fit in this draft than them taking Kelvin Banks at 11. Even if he plays on the right side first, or you've mentioned him as a guard first, I think he'd be a perfect successor to Trent Williams eventually when he retires. I think Williams is obviously better, and he's an all-timer, he's an all-time great athlete. But Banks, and the way he fits in to that outside zone scheme, having run it so much at Texas and being a solid pass protector, if he was on the board for me at 11 for the 49ers, I would sprint the card in. I think Kelvin Banks is the perfect player for them to take.
I think a couple other players, you mentioned Jahdae Barron. I think he's a perfect scheme fit for them as well. And what Robert Saleh wants to do in that secondary, I think he's a fantastic player. I just finished Jahdae Barron's scouting report. I will be shocked if he's not a top 10 player for me when my board is finalized. I love him that much. I think he's great. The other name that I'll throw out there, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, is the other player who I think is sneaky for this team because of how good of a run defender he is on the interior, how athletic he is, how big and strong he is, and how there's still some pass rush juice for him to achieve at the NFL level. So I think they'd be interested in him in the first round as well. Seattle Seahawks, the last team that we're talking about here today, they are $16.7 million over the cap in effective cap space. That's 29th in the NFL. So not a lot of flexibility there. Laken Tomlinson, Jerron Reed, Josh Jobe, Ernest Jones, some key free agents for them here. What about the team needs for the Seattle Seahawks, Dalton? What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple others listed here, but here's how I would put this. Left guard, right guard, and center. That's where I'm at with this Seahawks team, because the entire collapse of their season came along with their interior pass protection. I know there's been rumors about Geno Smith and what they're going to do at quarterback, but I do not care who their quarterback is until they fix this inside three on the offensive line. And the problem is they don't have a ton of money. So I think with Clint Kubiak coming in, you find some scheme fits, right? I just mentioned Aaron Banks from San Francisco. Kubiak runs a similar system. That's a guy. Could he bring Lucas Patrick over with him from the Saints? Could he go get a Robert Jones from the Miami Dolphins? Again, a similar system under Mike McDaniel as it is to Clint Kubiak. Those are the types of players I'm targeting in free agency. Maybe they can keep Ernest Jones at linebacker. Did a pretty good job for him down the stretch, but that nothing to me matters unless they fix this offensive line. You've got Charles Cross at left tackle, Abraham Lucas when he's healthy at right tackle, but this inside three cannot be as bad as it was to finish the season. They've got Olu Oluwatimi, who might be an option at center. They drafted Christian Haynes last year, who actually I think could be a better scheme fit for Clint Kubiak than he was for Ryan Grubb. You could see Christian Haynes find a way to start next year, but whatever happens this offseason, they need to come out of it feeling good about this interior three, whether it's free agency, the draft, guys they retain, combination of all of it. That's been the big focus for me. So I pretty much centered all of their offensive, their off-season plans around that.
I think Haynes is a good player. I think he's going to be one of their starting interior offensive linemen going into next season. I think Aaron Banks is a good one. I'll throw James Daniels in there as well, who was playing well in the early parts of the season, albeit a very small sample size before he gets hurt for the Steelers. Lucas Patrick was he hasn't been a great player throughout his NFL career, but he was great this past season with the New Orleans Saints. So he is worth taking a stab at, if you will. So I like the names that they have there. Bringing back Ernest Jones, I do think makes sense for this team. And then focusing on the defensive side of the ball, making sure the offensive line is shored up the way that you need it to. But then in the back end of the top 20 at pick number 18, you could focus on a guy like a Shamar Stewart, maybe even a Mike Green, somebody along the interior defensive line. And Nick Scorton, I think, is somebody who also sort of fits the bill of what they like with their defensive linemen. I think that could make a ton of sense for them. I love that you're getting the Willie Lampkin shout out there to potentially play as a center for them. He's got to play center, right? I know he played guard for North Carolina. There's no way he's playing guard at the NFL level at 5'10", 270, but man, his tape is so much fun, and his grades are great because of it. We saw him stand out at the Senior Bowl, so measurables be damned. He was fantastic and a lot of fun, but I do agree with you. No matter what happens with the Seahawks this past offseason or this upcoming offseason, whether it's the DK Metcalf trade rumors, the Geno Smith trade rumors, you got to make the offensive line a lot better than it was the year before. And I know Mike McDonald and John Schneider know that. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below. So if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can become one today.